So, welcome to the first panel. As you can see, here you are in the best of hands. And the point of this panel is to try to sort of to set the political scene. What is the world we live in? What are the markets that develops? What are the challenges? And not just, to do sort of the shopping list of crises that we have to solve, but to give a bit of dimension, a bit of color as to what we are doing. There are three main themes for our conversation. One is, of course, what can markets do for people in very difficult times? Obviously, for some families on a small budget, things can be very, very difficult. That goes in Europe, that goes, of course, also outside of Europe. But I will make it short because the theme of the cost of living crisis must also be matched with the mid and long-term discussion about competitiveness. How can we make sure that European businesses thrive and that they keep providing the jobs that will then feed into families being able to provide for themselves. So the two things must come together. And I can think of no better panel than this to give us their views. I know it's trivial to say that one's guest doesn't need introduction, yet just the same, welcome to Kristalina Georgieva, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. And a warm welcome to Nadia Calviño, First Deputy Prime Minister of Spain and Minister of Economic Affairs and Digital. And an equally warm welcome to Henrik Andersen, who is President and CEO of Vestas Group. And I think one of the reasons why we do have a lot of electricity. He's a compatriot of mine, so you will know a global group manufacturer of wind turbines. Rules of the game, pretty simple. Each panelist has 5 minutes to set out their initial thoughts. Then we try to have a conversation that I will try to moderate for the next 45 minutes. And then we will end with a Q&A session, if at all possible. Slido is open, and as Alexander said, in the room you just raise your hand if you have a question. So first and foremost, Kristalina, would you kick us off?
Thanks very much, Margrethe. For those who don't know me so well, I spent 7 years here in Brussels, and we were colleagues in the European Commission. So I have my mini version of 7 years in Tibet. The reason I'm referring to this time is because I was crisis commissioner for 5 years, and a lot of my thinking that applies to the period of time we lived through was impacted by the frequency and intensity of crisis I lived with between 2010 and 2015. So where are we today? First, we are living through a shock upon shock upon shock. In just short 3 years, we have experienced COVID, the brutal war Russia started on February 24th against Ukraine and its consequences, and now a cost of living crisis across the world. And the questions we have to ask ourselves is, what are the short-term consequences, but most importantly, what are the longer-term consequences, positive and negative, how to minimize the negative, how to enhance the positive. On the short-term side, very clearly, both COVID and Russia's war have pushed up prices and caused inflation to become a #1 global concern, translating into #1 priority for central banks to fight it to win. Why? Because inflation undermines the foundation for growth, and it is very damaging for the poorer parts of the population. It is a tax on the poor. But we also face a very difficult task to help people and businesses, and that gets into your area of competition. Why? Because there is a tremendous strain on households, and we see very difficult time, especially in Europe, for businesses to succeed. So fiscal policy, and Nadia will probably talk about it, faces a huge dilemma. On one side, COVID has exhausted its capacity, so buffers have shrunk. But on the other side, there is still tremendous pressure to help households and businesses, and do that in a fiscally responsible manner, medium term. My message on these two challenges, fight inflation, but still support those who need help, is it has to be consistent. What monetary policy does to tighten cannot be undermined by what fiscal policy does. In other words, if you are behind the wheel and monetary policy is pushing the brake, fiscal policy cannot step on the accelerator at the same time. Very difficult dilemma. And I would say in the next year, this would be the preoccupation of policymakers to properly navigate, tighten, but not too much, because then we would undermine growth, and support, but not too much, because it would fuel more inflation. And then, of course, we have financial stability considerations. But I'm much more concerned about the longer-term impacts of what we are living through. We are actually in a period of fundamental shift from the decades that were relatively predictable. And inflation was low, interest rates were low, and there was international order that put the foundation for trade and fueled a lot of our prosperity. Now we are in a time of much more volatility. We know we are in a more shock-prone world. Inflation is high, interest rates are high, the dollar is high, and the international community is facing more and more pressures leading to fragmentation. We may end up in a place that, Margrethe, all the power to you, in which the world breaks into blocks, and these blocks have their internal monetary systems, payment systems, trade rules, and of course, the consequences if we end up in this world are dramatic. We, as Nadia knows at the fund, we run a simulation of a world that breaks into two blocks. And what is the outcome? For rich countries, they drop in terms of their economies, they drop by 2%. But for emerging markets and developing economies, it is devastating. They can shrink all the way to 10, 15%. Now, imagine a world in which developing economies' populations are growing and their economies are shrinking. What would that mean for stability, for security, just for fairness? So I want to frame a question on how can we, rather than deglobalize, which seems to be now the mantra, we are deglobalizing, to actually re-globalize. Accept two things. One, globalization, the way we ran it, was not very fair. There were winners, but there were also losers. And we kind of said, yeah, but it's not that bad. Even if you are a loser, it's not losing so much. Well, if you're among the losers, that doesn't cut it with you. And the second one is, you know, if we deglobalize, we are making everybody worse off. Two wrongs don't make one right. And the second one is to recognize that actually security of supplies matter. So we have to have more diversified economies, because otherwise COVID taught us, and the war taught us, if supply chains are interrupted, this is a huge, huge problem for all. What is my view on that? My view is that we all have to work very hard to reinvent the relations we have with the honesty of saying what is possible and what is not. Not possible to go back to only cost considerations matter. So we do need regulation, and not possible to have competition, free for all, same rules everywhere, and you probably would touch upon that. But what is possible is to still think of our interdependence and drive collaboration, especially in areas where without it, as humanity, we are done, climate change being one of them. By the way, Nadia, that sits here, is my boss. She's the chair of IMFC, of our governing body at the IMF. We have 190 members. Our job is to keep them together and find the issues on which we can collaborate even in a more fragmented world. So that's my start for the day. Possible, not easy, but possible to keep the world together.
Wow. So now we have set sort of the global scene from times of predictability, low interest, sort of calmness, to times of volatility, inflation, higher interest rates, and the task not to deglobalize, but to sort of recalibrate globalization, to find new ways. And part of that recalibration, if I get you right, is of course legitimate concerns of security of supply.
Yep.
So far, so good, Nadia.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Is it working? Yes. It's a great pleasure to be here again and see so many friends. Long time no see, and the pandemic has made it so difficult for us to meet in person. So it's great to be here. And I'm going to follow up on Kristalina and try to also be a bit provocative with 3 points from my side. The first one is that once inflation will be controlled and interest rates will stabilize or whatever, the monster will continue to be there. There's a short tale in Spanish that says this, is you wake up and the monster is still there. No? In a sense, the tectonic shift of the geopolitical order that has ruled since the end of Second World War is a deep change. And it is affecting security, it's affecting technology, it's affecting everything, society, and it's affecting trade. And I think it would be naive to think that this is just a reversible kind of move that will go back to where we were before. I will come to this in a second. And so these, in terms of competition policy, this is shaking the playing field. It's not level, it's shaking, and we need to make sure it doesn't capsize. I think that summarizes what you were saying, Kristalina, but that we set the new rules of this brave new world, which is in the making, and it is up to us to decide how we want to shape it. Well, not alone, unfortunately, but we have a great influence, I think, in deciding which way to go. Which brings me to my second point, which is 3 thoughts that I was thinking about listening to you this morning. One is, you said dilemmas. I think these are trade-offs. And sometimes these trade-offs are very difficult to sort out. And sometimes they become extremely easy, in a matter of hours. For example, one would think the green transition. Well, there's a very difficult trade-off between short-term and long-term. We're going to be talking about that, I'm sure. Short-term, this imposes costs. This actually raises prices. This imposes technological changes. This also requires a change in the skills of the people. So this changes labor market. But in the long run, it's going to be great. But I think the war has actually taught us that short-term and long-term, we need to accelerate the green transition for reasons of strategic autonomy. So it's not just a matter of what we hope to have in the mid-run. It's not even a matter of responsibility vis-a-vis our children. It's a matter of our short-term security. So, it's been sorted out. Likewise, coming to competition policy, one could think, well, in the short run, let's just, subsidize whatever, and let us take whatever decisions are needed, because in the long run, the new equilibrium will surely bring competition back to the forefront. Well, I think this is a bit trickier. Margrethe and I, we discuss this very often, but we need to make sure that short-term and long-term are coherent, as Kristalina was saying. I'll come back to this, I think, in the second round. And the third trade-off is the one that Kristalina was saying, fiscal and monetary policy. We need coherence also between the articulation of the two policies. Today there's a very important meeting going on of the European Central Bank, which is surely going to also add some new elements to the playing field, without any doubt, at European and at global level. So trade-offs is the first element we really need to go deeper into. Second one is inertia. All institutions have inertia. I have been seeing this for the last year when it comes to energy regulation. So 1 year ago from Spain, we saw energy prices going up. We said, something's happening. This is serious. We need to tackle it. We need to adjust our rules. It's taken a year for some to realize that the rules were no longer fit for purpose. I fear it's a bit the same with telecoms regulation, I have to say. And I've said it openly, and I see it. We need to really take account of the fact that the markets have dramatically changed in these years, and they are changing as we speak. And I do think that we have to rethink also competition rules, adjust them so that they are absolutely fit for these new realities, ensuring that we preserve effective competition, but in a new playing field with a global framework which is totally different to the one we knew 10 years ago. And my third point is one of melancholy and hope. So many would say, I'd like to go back to the world of yesterday, no? Die Welt vom Gestern. And I think Kristalina is very, very right in saying, and I think realism is important in this sense. We're not going back to the world of yesterday. And we should not think, oh, it was so good in the good old times. Well, it doesn't serve any purpose to have melancholy. I think that what we need is to look forward. And here's my message of hope. We were very good in reacting to the pandemic. Conversely to what happened in the financial crisis, there was a European response. It was a united response. We acted with determination on the basis of solidarity. And I think these three principles should guide us also when responding to the war. Unity, determination, solidarity. We can discuss Antonio Costa's proposals in the second round, but I think, we have a good compass. It served us well to go through the pandemic. So let's continue to work on a joint European response based on these three principles when facing the challenges that we're confronted with today and those that may come in the coming months. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nadia. I think this is exactly what this day will bring us, in-depth discussions about the trade-offs. And you have given us also, I think, the challenge as to how to make short and long-term needs to be coherent, how to break out of inertia in the unpredictable world that Kristalina drew up for us. And last but not least, realize that behind us, they turned out the light. There is nothing to go back to. So we need to move forward. And in that world, Henrik, what to do?
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Commissioner and Executive Vice President, and for me, just Margrethe, but for inviting me here today. And I think, thank God we are not going back to yesterday. Because if we were that, we would actually go backwards in the energy transition, and that will be even more dangerous to where we are today. So I think we are gathered here today. We are making markets work for people and business. It's a central topic for all of us. The competition, the internal markets, and definitely its rules are important to keep businesses on our toes, so to say. We cannot defend fair and free trade and competition across the globe if we are not walking that talk here in Europe. We cannot do that. And the internal and single market is one of the main pillars of the European Union. I think a large part of the EU legislation relates to the 4 basic freedoms of which the internal and single market is based on. It's the free movement of goods, its services, capital, and people, not least. In order for the single market to remain strong, fair competition rules are required. Competition also needs proper market rules that gives a level playing field. In wind, it's been a bit too much race to the bottom on price and cost, with wind is now one of, if not the most cost-competitive source of power today. Most cost-competitive source of power today. So might say that's a success, rightly so, because it is. But in the current energy crisis, it calls for wind energy to be valued fairly. First of all, to the benefits it brings Europe, decarbonization, job creation, and not least now, energy security. So competition, not only on cost, but also on the value. So the EU Commission can help tremendously here. Traditional costs have been a key driver for decision-making when designing policy initiatives and investing in low-carbon technologies. Now the technology provides energy, i.e. electricity, to a level that is currently between 1/5 to 1/10 of the current market prices. So the cost of it compared to what we are faced with is there. So you mentioned it in your introduction, Margrethe, that the address also here is about the concerned consumer. And I sincerely hope over this good hour that I can also bring or contribute with a little bit of input. There is here a solution that is workable, scalable within the citizen and the person and the consumer in EU. But I'll also encourage here politicians to not only short-term deal with the symptoms. We are symptoms regulating things. We are giving the patients a little bit of painkillers, and then we are saying we are now making the energy prices lower in the short run. But at the same time, we have been spending 3 or 6 months on doing that. We have basically done nothing in terms of permitting. We have done nothing in terms of putting more up. And the reality right now is where we are in end of October. We have done less this year in new permitting and installation of renewable than we did last year. And last year we only did approximately half of what we needed to do in our own target making. So we have to accelerate actions and investments for that net zero carbon future. And we need a market that evaluates economic, environmental, social, and technical outcomes of potentially those energy solutions. So we need to shift political and commercial focus beyond just the cost to include the value as well. So shifting the narrative of energy transition towards system value is critical for society and the economy. And for example, increased investment in renewable technologies and accompanying green infrastructure will yield social return. It will yield the energy security far higher than its initial investment. And the private sector goes hand in hand very much with the public sector here. So thanks, and I look forward to a good discussion. And as you can probably hear, I'm not politically elected, so therefore I have a more free introduction to some of these things. So I look very much forward to our discussion here.
Well, thank you very much for a somewhat grim perspective. It was said this morning in the Danish news that carbon emissions, they will peak 2025. So we're still on an upgoing trajectory. Kind of gets your sense of urgency. Of course, kind of lovely weather if you're short on gas this October, but also a bit sort of troubling. Henrik, you point a picture where you say, well, competition on costs have gotten us very far, but that is too limited. You need also to compete on quality, on resilience, on making sure that supply chains actually work. Nadia, in this perspective, well, do markets then actually work for people? Are markets doing their job?
Well, I'm sorry, Margrethe, but I would like to comment two or three things on what Henrik was saying and complement, which I think leads to the reply to your question. No? But, and what is the role of the EU? Because I think your point is a very important one, which is Europe has to be in the lead. We have to walk the talk. If we want the global economy to go in this direction, because let's be honest, if we don't get China and the US to follow suit, then we won't be able to stop climate change. So we really need, as Kristalina was saying, to bring everybody with us. And Europe is leading, and we're all very committed, and we have a roadmap, and I think we're all really convinced, you know, that this is the right way forward. But we have to be very mindful that we don't put requirements and a very high standard for European industry, which makes them go to other countries, which is actually something that is happening. Be it because the energy prices are very high, or be it because the regulation is very tight. And so this is something that also, I think, has to do with the unlevel playing field. I think when we think about markets, we really have to start thinking about global markets in many of these areas. Because if we only look at the national dimension or even the European dimension, we are missing a big part of the story. And we have seen this very clearly, I think, these last 2 years. When you were talking about the security of value chains, markets have to provide low prices, high quality, security of supply. This is something that we maybe were not thinking so much about. And so this is shifting the way we approach this discussion and this issue. So I really think the role of the EU and the role of the European Commission, I'm going to exaggerate here probably, but has never been more important. Because it is now that we need to have a carbon border adjustment mechanism, that we need to have harmonized standards, that we need to ensure that Europe leads, but we don't die in the effort of leading, no? And we bring everybody with us. That's the first point I wanted to share. Second one, you were talking about renewables, and this is very good news. In the hours, Spain has a competitive advantage on sun. I acknowledge it. Huh? It is even more competitive than wind. When it comes to the price. In those hours of the day when wind and sun are the marginal technologies setting the price in the Spanish market, it's below €1 per megawatt hour. So it is extremely cheap. So this is not only the cleanest technology, it is also the cheapest technology. It's a no-brainer again. There's no trade-off. You know, we have to move ahead as fast as possible. And I think that is something that maybe people still think, oh, but you know, renewables are more expensive. No, and with the massive investments that we are putting into these technologies through the recovery plans, they are going to become cheaper. So we have to move ahead as fast as possible. I couldn't agree more than what you said. Permitting. Also, smooth processing of all procedures, including those that have to do with state aid and other processes here in the Commission, regulatory processes. It's just this sense of urgency is asking us to move ahead very fast. And here again, the Commission has a very important role to play. At local level, there are many resistances. There's a strong inertia on the side of many who say, oh yes, but this is not good for the landscape, or this, I don't like this close to my, not in my backyard. So we really need to get our act together, because accelerating permitting and the whole smooth deployment of these technologies should be our top priority. I couldn't agree more. And my last point is on markets. Are they delivering? Yes, but what we should require from markets is different. And that makes it imperative that we also become more autonomous in technological areas such as chips, 5G, the batteries that we need for the electric cars. And we have become suddenly aware that we are vulnerable and we depend not only in the supply of semiconductors, but also in some of the raw materials which are essential to make the wind turbines, to make the solar panels. So I think we need a very all-encompassing, holistic approach to value chains when we are assessing our markets delivering. And also we need to take a strategic approach in ensuring that we do have reliability in the access to these kind of technologies, which we have painfully discovered are absolutely essential and strategic for our development and progress.
Well, thank you very much for that as well. That sort of unnerving worldview that you left us with, Kristalina.
It's going to get better from here on,
Okay.
I promise.
But if it's going to get better from here, then how? Could you elaborate a bit about how we changed?
I mean, I have obviously been thinking a lot on what is the silver lining of this more turbulent world we live in. And one is the recognition that is finally sinking everywhere, that as a global community we have one particular task, and it is to fight and win against the climate crisis. Why? Because we can survive a recession. It's painful, for some people really, really harsh, but we can survive it. We can survive inflation. Again, painful, but we are not going to die from it. We cannot survive as humanity an unmitigated climate crisis. It is as simple as that. And if you use this as your big organizing principle, because it is an area where we need each other and it can help us as a world to be together, then the question is, what is the role of competition policy? What is the role of regulation? The role of competition policy is to create conditions for renewables to move as fast as possible. And that goes into state aid and how it is being deployed. It goes into competition policy pressing for simplification of permitting and creating a kind of a rise, move towards more of it faster. And what is the role of regulation? It is to very squarely bring the carbon-intensive activities down, and we know what the answer to this is. It is a carbon price that is predictable and goes up over time to, by 2030, at least $75, $80 a ton. Globally today, what is the price? Do people know what is globally today the price of 1 ton of carbon? $5 a ton. Now, good news, it was $3 a ton 2 years ago. So we are moving in the right direction. Bad news, if we move the way we are, ain't gonna get it by 2030. And one thing that I want to leave with you as professionals is, as of now, when we sum up all our commitments, we are 50 to 66% only up to our target. So we are not making it, and not making it for those of us on this panel, especially me being, I think, the most mature individual on the panel. I will survive. What about my daughter? What about my grandchildren? What about them? How do I take responsibility for them to live in a world where average temperatures are 3 to 4 degrees higher, meaning big part of the planet is not livable. So we have to really muscle up the will to move both competition policy and regulatory policy on a faster pace, or otherwise, very simply, we are cooked, literally. Literally. So this is my main message. I also know, and would you allow me to just add one more thing which gets into competition policy? I also know that if we are not conscious about the impact on people, and we go with a willy-nilly increase of carbon price, that is going to cost us the support of today's generation. We cannot allow that. So we have to complement actions on this, which I strongly believe is our top priority, with actions on making our economies fairer. And there is a lot competition policy and regulation can do. Today, it is not fair. Today, labor productivity goes up, but wages don't follow. In Germany, the distance between labor productivity and wage growth is 5%. In Belgium, it is 10%. And you go further, and the difference in percentages grow. So we have to make sure that labor benefits as much as the other factors of production in a fair manner. And again, competition policy can play a very active role. And finally, we have to accept that we are not yet tuned to speak truth to people and to speak truth to power. And that has to change. Can I give one example, just so this is not a phrase? Here is an example. We know that we have become, over the decades, way too comfortable. One of my colleagues gave me a fun statistics. In the mid-70s, average temperature in a household in the United Kingdom, I know they're not anymore a EU member, but hey, they're still Europeans, was slightly over 15 degrees. Today, average temperature is over 21 degrees. Maybe there is not that much bad in a price signal that gets people to lower the thermostats so we can have lower carbon intensity. But overall, can we please be honest? 23 is going to be a difficult year. It's going to be tough. Tough calls have to be made. Rather than trying to sugarcoat and say, yeah, you know what, we are going to somehow swing. If we don't take action, 2030 is going to be a very bad beginning of the next decade if we don't take action on climate change. And then bring the positive in, bring the hope that Nadia is talking about. We people are incredibly creative. We actually can do this stuff as long as we have the will to act. And act we must.
And everyone can join. You know, I am knitting like crazy, exactly to meet the colder warmth. And there is a surplus of wool in Europe. We're talking about, you know, tons and tons and tons of wool because we like more what is inside the animal than what is outside the animal. So just get knitting. That is definitely part of it. And does it give you sort of the thrills, not for not having a sweater, but to listen to this new world that is being depicted? Because competition has given your sector innovation, scale, cost curves that are very, very attractive. And now you hear about a new world of resilience, of diversification of supply chains, of a different sort of take on security, of a new emboldened role for the states when it comes to regulation.
Yeah, I'm always, and now I say I've been in the job and I've been in industry for all my working life. I have two daughters that are 20 and 23-year-old. And at least back home, we stopped pretending and we stopped giving each other false sort of hopes in a world we are living in. And I think now it's another panel. And I always is encouraged of now we're going back and now we're doing something about it. But I've listened to many panels for now 3 years. And I think 24th of February raised and increased the stakes in the panels. And we are saying the same. And I can say, all of you have now my mobile number. I will pick it up and I will make sure you get the turbines. But it's not happening in the speed we are talking about. Mm-hmm. So therefore, from a renewable energy point of view, I'm increasingly frustrated over to see that we are, let's put it out, we are not talking the facts that is behind it. And let me give you a couple of examples from, we can talk about inside and outside Europe, but take offshore as an example for wind. Develops in Europe, we are bidding negative prices in the US, offshore wind seabed leases in the US. It's 125 times higher cost per acre than the oil and gas fields in the US. So who's going to pay for that? Well, the levelized cost of energy that comes from offshore wind in the US, right? In the UK, most recently, the CFD round 4. The cut price of CFD round 4, somebody wanted to have a press release out there saying new historic low, 37.5 pounds per megawatt hour of offshore wind in the UK. The market price at that day was more than 300 pounds per megawatt hour. The most recently nuclear, when it comes live, the Hinkley, is probably market price around 200 pounds per megawatt hour. And then we insist on doing 37.5 pounds per megawatt hour, rather than saying, well, in the thing we are in, and we might not need to turn it back to 15 degrees, but it might be we needed to turn it to 18. We could have done 16 gigawatt instead of 8 gigawatt in the UK and cut the price as 50 gigawatt per hour. And it will still have been a seventh of the market price. Mm-hmm. But then we are back to something which is close to my heart, which is it also shows that it's not just a global competition or subsidy race. It's here and now. It's actually a market comparable, and we need to get it done. And Nadia, now you're sitting next to me, and I love Spain, and I'm often in Spain, and I have factories in Spain. I have many colleagues in Spain. But I will just highlight, when you now sort of gave me a little bit of solar is cheaper than wind. Do you know what? That the history also shows one extremely tough learning. Europe was among the leaders in that technology 20 to 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. And as late in 2018, we removed tariff and anti-dumping on the solar panels, and today the technology sits outside EU. Yeah. And if we are not very carefully, now we know today where we need to buy the panels from. Does that pose us a risk? Absolutely. But it is cheaper, potentially. I hope you're right in the long run. But I can guarantee you, if we repeatedly do the same and act with the same level of degree of naivety, we could end in a much worse situation. So this is about how do we do it, and how do we set those playing rules also when it comes to competition. So driving your home markets in a competitive free is so, so important. And in this one, I'm here to help.
So Nadia, that's, yes, thank you. Nadia, that is a question to you. Just Henrik, usually I'd say, no, we've not been naive, but we've been greedy. Because we wanted it all at a very low price. So Nadia, maybe that now you represent every politician. So is there a willingness to pay for the security of supply, to pay for the resilient supply chain, to pay for the rare earths being mined and produced in environmentally safe manners? Because I think for a number of reasons, and most of them bad, you know, for instance, all lithium for batteries is being processed in China. A lot of the raw materials that goes into windmills, they come from outside of the European Union. is there a political will to pay the price for all the things that is being said these years?
Yes, well, I wouldn't say I represent all politicians, frankly, but what I can tell you, and I knew you would, I said I would be provocative, but 3 points, very important. First one is we need to bring the people with us. This is something I think that would be number one conclusion from my panel. Really, citizens have to understand, because otherwise people in their villages say, not in my backyard. I don't want it's mostly the windmills that are creating a negative reaction. And then local politicians do not want to force their people, because then they will not be re-elected, So we have to be very realistic about this. And think, how to address this issue, which I think is common to all European countries. But that's a first point I think is extremely important. The second one is absolutely convinced we need to develop the technologies in the EU. Some of them, I don't mean, but and Margrethe, because we have discussed this a lot, and I was seeing Antonio Costa, well, one of the assets that you have in Portugal and Spain is lithium. So we want to have the battery production together with the mines, because also citizens close to a mine, they don't like the mine just as such, because they don't see the value added. But if you have a battery factory close to the mine, then they understand there is a value added, good jobs will be created. We are absolutely determined, and this is one of the top priorities we have, to see about chip manufacturing in the EU, lithium transformation and the battery production for the cars, and all the other elements that we see are strategic. And this is what I was referring to as we need to really speed up and find a way to do it. Maybe the important projects of European interest are the right way forward. Same for green hydrogen. We're betting on green hydrogen in Europe. Well, we have to really support it. It's really, we should identify these 5 or 6 priorities, 5G, and then go ahead straight on, because this is not a matter of Spain competing against Portugal or against France. It's Europe needs to develop these capabilities, or else we will continue to be dependent, as you rightly say, on some partners which maybe are not as reliable as we may have thought. And the third point is, I think, and this is my feel-good message, I do see that we have moved in these last years. I very much welcome the Commission doing the subsidy review, and having a different approach to state aid from third countries. This is something that was long discussed, and finally we're doing something about it. The review of some of the key rules having to do with cooperation between SMEs and technological and R&D agreements between small companies and also with large companies. Antonio Costa was talking about these. I really think we have to go deep into all these issues and adjust our rules so that they are fit for purpose, because the rhythm of reality is faster maybe than what we thought we could cope with without reviewing this framework. But I am positive, that we are moving in the right direction. My only point would be, Kristalina was calling for action. I would say accelerate, accelerate the actions that we're already taking.
Yep. And maybe just a small point here. When we talk about this energy imbalance, in many countries, in many markets, in many times of the day, we are talking about a few percentages imbalance in supply and demand, which is actually making, unfortunately, in energy, the whole dilemma is that it is the marginal last price of the kilowatt hour that decides the price of all of it. Because as we are in shortage of 1 kilowatt, it becomes almost prohibitive expensive. So the point here from my side is, instead of now trying to compensate for a third of a prohibitive high price, we should actually spend all our time, and we could do all of that basically within not this winter, but next winter. And this is not solved in one go, but at least just get to a point. Because when you mention hydrogen, which is power to X, and it's all these wonderful things that we can do on green fuels and other stuff, which is wonderful, the precondition for all of this is even more green electricity. And it is enormously volume of green electricity, which we don't have enough of already to have our current consumption. So there is a little bit here. It has to be in stages now, and we have to fix the energy crisis first, and then we can talk about the further of, for instance, the hydrogen and others. I think that's very, very important in the current one. Otherwise, I'll be very concerned consumer out there if we don't get that fixed.
We are soon going to have questions from the audience, so just that you get ready. Just one thought on what you say, and thank you for appreciating it, Nadia, that we now have the foreign subsidy instrument. So, for instance, if you bid in a tender in Europe and you have subsidies in your books, you have to notify it. And if you don't, then you're obviously in bad faith, and we can come and get you if it turns out that you have subsidies. But when we prepared for this legislation, of course, we intensively consulted the public and member states. And some member states, they were a bit, because when it's someone else's taxpayers who are giving the subsidy, it gives very attractive prices for your own citizen. Of course, then you outcompete businesses that are located in your own country, but that has long-term effects rather than the short-term effects of getting a very good deal in the tender for your own voters. And that was a trade-off, and thanks hard work, we came out on the right side, because of course we want fairness. We don't want that businesses are outcompeted with subsidies sitting on their books, no matter if they come from a foreign country or they come from another member state. But it's just to say that these things are not trivial. They are so not trivial to make short-term and long-term meet. Maybe just one more thought, Georgieva, because if you look at what we are trying to do competition-wise, which is to tame market power, to make sure that everyone has a fair go, what you said about emerging economies, is there a hidden cost to market power that we don't see and appreciate that you see from your work?
Well, what we see is one, that there has been globally an acceleration of monopoly power, especially in the high-tech industries. And we know the impact it has on innovation. It stifles innovation. We are also seeing monopoly power being exercised from capital versus workers. And we think that it has been an unattended topic. We actually came up from the fund with analysis and publications around that, the negative impact of excessive market power. What I want to say is that Europe is really a great example of strong synergy between competition and regulation. And so the single market of Europe remains the best achievement that the rest of the world is still learning from. So all the power to you, Margrethe, and the colleagues you have in DG how is it now called? DG competition?
Yes, DG competition.
Okay,
yeah,
simple.
Yeah.
No, because everything has become so complicated in names. Just good. So what I do believe is that we also have to be always mindful of the law of unintended consequences. And I'm bringing this when we talk about border adjustment tax. It is a great thing if it serves as a pressure point for everybody else to adopt carbon pricing. But it is going to be a very bad thing if we end up really using it, because it would be a race for others to come up with border adjustment tax, and before we know it, it would turn into a protectionism fight, and it would create obstacles to what you actually strive for, which is fair and open competition, fair and open market. So I would strongly advise us to double our efforts to create an international carbon price floor and bring developing countries on board. Because, as your question indicates, there are distortions that impact emerging markets, developing economies, more than the advanced world. The most visible distortion up to date is in tax competition. Race to the bottom, emerging markets try to attract investments, so they bring their taxes down. So the 15% tax, I pray, will come into effect. And why is this highly problematic? Because an unfair world is unstable world.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this. Do we have a question in the audience? Yes, we do. I think that question that we have ahead of us is the Slido question. So is there someone in the room who would want to ask a question? Yes, please, over there.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself so we know.
Simon Holmes. I think I'm down as Oxford University in the listings. The panel has spoken eloquently about the need for support for renewables, whether it's finance or permits and so forth. But also everybody spoke about the need for coherence between the short term and the long term, which is essential. The one thing I haven't heard anything about is support for fossil fuels. The massive amount and increasing support to fossil fuels. I think the IMF figure is over 600 billion a year now. Isn't that something which should be at the centre of this debate, alongside the issues which you're talking about, if we're to have true coherence?
So the question is the question we talked about, how to promote renewables, how to reconcile short-term and long-term effects and needs. And the question is, well, what about the support for fossil fuels that we see is increasing right now? Many member states would have capacity mechanisms that one way or another rely on fossil fuels. A short round of comments. Would you kick us off, Henrik?
Yeah, I think I'm clearly an open market, free transition person here. So I'm fully encouraging that the transition will have to happen over many decades. So therefore, the investment into energy sources has to continue as long as we need more energy. So therefore, the continuing either phase out of certain energy sources and replacing by renewable has to happen in a parallel. There are three silos in my world, is that you have to look at what you want to get less of, what you want to get more of, and then you got the silo in the middle, which is actually us all. That is, what is our demand? And those three silos have to communicate pretty instantly every week, because if we do something there, then it doesn't fit. So I'm still the one that part of the fossil and the current we want maybe less of when we look 30 years ahead has also to be used a little bit as a benchmark in the energy transition. So free market, and we please don't phase it out too early, because then we create a real energy crisis. I mean, times whatever.
Nadia?
Well, I would add a but to this reflection, in the sense that, unfortunately, investments take years to materialize. So there is a strategic decision to take now. Do we make the investments so that we continue to have fossil fuel production for the next 10, 20, 30 years? How far? This is something, by the way, that is discussed in the context of the IMF meetings, in particular with those countries that are the CO2 producing energy, I mean, the Middle East, to cut it short. So this is very much the one of the conundrums that we're confronted with right now, which is they say, well, if I am to make the necessary investments to increase production, then these investments are going to materialize in 10 years' time. So how am I going to fund it when you're telling me in 10 or 20 years' time you're no longer going to demand oil? So I think it's a bit more complicated, because this timing consistency also has to do with investments. My second point is that, this is very real, in Spain, as in many other countries, we have established a number of mechanisms to support households, to support the different sectors, to cushion the blow, which came to Spain before other countries, so we've been absorbing it. And luckily, prices are already going down in Spain, so that's good news. But now, many measures end by the end of the year. Well, when we decide what to do for next year, one of the key issues that we will be discussing and reflecting upon is this consistent with our green transition strategy? So to give you an example, there's a choice between, do we continue to cushion the blow on car drivers in terms of the oil and diesel prices, or do we bet on free public transportation by train, which is, I think, by far the most impactful measure that we have taken from a social point of view and from an economic point of view, and it's also consistent with the green transition. Okay, guess which measure we have put into the draft budget, which is negotiated in Spain as we speak? The free public transportation by train, so that commuters are now using train instead of taking their car. I'm not saying we will not be forced to take some measures that maybe are not 100% what we would like to do from this midterm perspective. I'm just saying that the political system also does have a choice. And this we see every day, you know, at the national level. But trying to make the short and long-term objectives coherent, I think, is one of the top principles if we want to achieve our goals at the end of the day.
Kristalina.
I mean, the question is correct that we have to think through the transition period and make sure that we are not undermining the functioning of the economy because we press for exit before we have alternatives. And that is a very fair point, and indeed, for a while we were overly optimistic on how quickly we can move to renewables, but we didn't make the investments that are necessary to move that quickly. And they're not just in renewables, they're also in integrated grids, how we can improve the efficiency of energy supply. There is a lot that we could have done more of, but we didn't. So we pay a price, and the price is that this year, next year, we would see increase of the use of fossil fuels rather than a decrease. And the question is, what next? And this is where we have to concentrate our attention. What next has to be, one, there would be a period, a moment when prices are going to drop. We know that there is going to be, for a wrong reason, because the economy slows down, fossil fuel prices would go down as well. This is the moment to put a carbon price, to put the incentive that would accelerate the transition. In other words, and accept that we are not going to exit fossil fuels in one go, but we have to think, are we putting the right incentives in place over time? Subsidizing fossil fuels, at the IMF, we use the term harmful subsidies to differentiate subsidies that are actually for the bigger public good. Subsidizing fossil fuels is harmful. Pull this out. We know, we actually say the price of the fossil fuel subsidies are about $500 to $600 billion. But we don't talk about the implicit subsidy, which is the absence of a carbon price, the fact that we are not internalizing externalities. If we put this into place, plus health impacts of fossil fuels, then we come up with trillions, probably in the order of $5 trillion. Now imagine what we can do with this amount of money. So it boils down to being really rational in public policy and thinking through the longer term impact of decisions we take today. Can I finish with a joke?
But we're not done yet.
And we're not done. Okay, I thought that was my last chance.
No, we're not done yet. We're not done.
I still would
Especially if
you
make it a bit short, then we're not done yet. And now everyone is, on their toes because they want to stay put for the joke. We have a Slido question, and actually it's a good follow-up to what you have been saying throughout our talk here, the question of a carbon price, because the question is, It's the task of competition policy to tackle market failures like external effects. I think externalities are present in pollution and in digital markets. Any one of you who wants to give it a try?
I see competition policy actually smoothen some of these externalities. So they can I say that they shouldn't try to become now we got a crisis, now we got a Monday to a Friday response to it. I see some of these things actually smoothen, taking some of the worst parts out of it, and probably also taking the best part out of it when it's the positive days. So I see that quite different in a positive aspect, which I think we have learned of also from history.
I think competition policy is a very powerful tool, but it cannot solve all problems on Earth. And I think that it is up to regulation, carbon pricing, international cooperation to deal with those externalities. I really would focus on having a different approach to making markets work for people, as we have discussed in the first round, but not try to use one instrument to address all possible issues at stake.
And a thought on externalities and competition policy. Actually, yes, no, you kick it off.
I think that we got very good answers, and I thought this question was directed to you. You are the competition czar, so I pass.
Well, we have actually time for another question. We have already one from Slido. It says, we spoke a lot about energy, but how to build a stronger digital industry at speed to reduce the shortage of workforce, ensuring skills and innovation. And that is the $1,000 question, euro question. I think you know the next year will be the year of skills to address some of the shortages. But here, any silver bullets?
I need to take this one, being responsible for digitalization. And we talked a lot about energy, but I think that we really need to also speed up in the deployment of the new technologies and digital infrastructures. As I said a moment ago, deployment of 5G is not a matter of one country or another. It's a matter of Europe standing up to the other countries, and likewise with the other disruptive technologies. And here, public-private investment and cooperation is essential. Like happened with many other technological developments in other parts of the world, the World Wide Web or many other changes, GSMA, this brings together public and private, it brings the industry to cooperate, to develop these new technologies, and we really need to speed up because otherwise we will be lagging behind. And I do think we're doing a lot and we have improved a lot, and the important projects of common European interest are also playing a role there. I will really call for all of us also, that's why I said probably in the area of energy, maybe there is also inertia in the area of telecoms and digitalization. This is accelerating exponentially at world level, and we cannot be lagging behind as Europeans if we want to be also playing our role in the new world which is in the making.
Henrik?
Maybe I was inspired by Kristalina, which we met in the beginning, because we were a bit excited about that we could meet in person. We could have because we can now travel again and other stuff. And I'm 100% believer in digital and the advancement of it. But I also think that what we probably learned under the COVID, we learned we could do a lot. We could limit, we could do a lot without necessarily traveling and seeing each other. And that probably put also a reduction to the how mobile we are so some of the shortages we are now seeing in workforce and skills and development is coming also in the back end of a COVID, where we got very much used to that we can fix most of it back from my kitchen, right? And I think we need to get back into also and saying if we are not coming very much looking inwards and national or regional, then we need to also find back to the mobilization of all of us again. So I think there is a trade-off between digital and then reduction in being mobile and explore the world, so to say, which I still see that as a bit of a danger right now, that our workforce is not as mobile as it was 2.5 years ago.
Well, I'd also say that if the pandemic is sort of the prequel to a fully digitalized society, it's a no thank you from me. Because I find that quite hideous, that you're sitting in your couch, and of course during the pandemic it was two-dimensional, and even if you get 3 or 4-dimensional technology, still sitting in your couch, working, learning, socializing, exercising, shopping. No, not really, no. Kristalina, thoughts? This is now the final.
This is now the final. On the question of digitalization, if we are to talk about preparing people for a digital world, we have to make the environment in which we all operate, independent of generation, much more conducive for it. E-government, some countries, Estonia of course leads, some countries are better than others. A digital ID, in Europe this is still not a unified, and it has to become, because it's a major factor. Digital services from social services to banking. Again, in Europe this is somewhat still uneven. I was recently in India, and the way India has taken off on digital is incredible. So no thank you to living in a world that everything is virtual, like you know, but getting the European Union to bring a single market concept in the digital space faster than it is doing it now, yes to that. Now, my joke. The most important thing that we are faced with is actually mindset change. And here is my joke on that. God calls Moses and says, Moses, I have 2 pieces of news for you. One is good, the other one is bad. Which one do you want first? Moses says, please give me the good news first, God. God says, the good news is you would raise your hand, split the sea, and take your people to safety. Moses says, God, after this, there could not be bad news. Wait a minute. To get there, you have to make an environmental impact assessment first. Why am I using it? Because if we talk about environment, we have built this mindset that taking action on the environment is costly and it's kind of bad news. And we have to change that. The same way we have to change how we think about people. Education and healthcare and social protection, this is not a cost, it is an investment in people. And I think we, in Europe, we have this incredible story of the convergence engine we generated. And now is the time for Europe to actually move in this mindset change and lead the world to a better destiny. That's my final word.
I don't think that this could be better final words, because we started out in this somewhat grim, disturbing picture of shock upon shock upon shock that is preparing us for a world of volatility, of high inflation, of changes in interest rates, and a lot of changes going on. But I think slowly but surely we got ourselves into a much more positive scenario, that we have turned the light out behind us. There is no past to turn back to, but there is a future if we get the speed up for the investments to be made for the green transition. And in that, possibly the change of mindsets is an absolutely essential keyword, because we have been talking about this now for quite some time. In Europe and globally, how to increase the speed. And that probably is the only silver lining of having war on the doorstep of Europe, that we must accelerate the green transition, getting people on board. And here, of course, there is a lot of good competition news, because we're so ready. to support where support is needed in a way that still allows for a level playing field. With this, I will release my panel. Thank you very, very much to Henrik, Nadia, and Kristalina. Thank you.